everybody knows what happened Sunday evening with the Super Bowl. I was forced to find out that debauchery had begun earlier. And you know how I was forced to find out? There was some AT&T Super Saturday thing that happened before the Super Bowl that was just as soft porn as the Super Bowl halftime thing was. I mean, and how do I know that? Because I was watching it? No, because Twitter kept throwing it at me. I mean, I'd be sitting here and I have at home or here at the office. Now, at home, my monitors sit right here. So I've got two 27-inch monitors next to my MacBook Pro. And here at the office, they're up above. So they're together up above it. Anyway, and I'd be sitting here working on something, and I'd look up at Twitter, and here's running video of I'm sure she's some superstar. I don't have a clue who she is. She's wearing a gold aluminum foil one-piece bathing suit type thing that leaves nothing to the imagination. Prancing around, twerking, doing all this stuff, and it's this AT&T thing. Bring the mouse over, click, hide this ad. They don't even give you the proper, why do you not want to see this ad? Because it's stinking offensive. No, that's not one of the choices. Too personal, I think, is as close as you can get. So gone. Half an hour later. It's back 3 times. I had to tell Twitter, I'm not interested in seeing this. So the point is, we got an eyeful of a number of, well, interestingly enough, 40-plus year old women doing their twerking and everything else and completely losing all self-respect in front of millions and millions of people. And so I saw a discussion of it, and I quoted it. I got permission, by the way. I specifically contacted the author, got permission, because I wanted to make another point that hopefully will be helpful to everybody. It's going to make a lot of folks really angry, but that's life. Let me just read a portion of it. I posted on Facebook. I did not post it on the blog. I posted on Facebook. And I basically, without Googling, who said this? Let me just read the first 3 paragraphs. No, I didn't watch Super Bowl halftime yesterday. Actually, I didn't watch the match itself as I'm not into watching sports, but that's another issue. By the way, the clue that only a couple people caught was in that first line. Match. Who calls a football game a match? Well, you'll find out in a second. But one can't help read about the antics in today's newsfeed. Truly, we live in disturbing times. What would have been an act that 100 or even 50 years ago perverted men would pay to see in some small dark club in a seedy part of town is now mainstream entertainment that is lapped up by hundreds of millions of people on prime time. Fathers and mothers watch with their children as semi-naked bodies dance, shake, intertwine, twerk, jiggle, and perform all types of indecent moves in what even a few decades ago would have been deemed semi-pornographic. And those who merely point this out are labeled as backward prudes. I am fully aware this post of mine will be mocked and taken as Exhibit A for those who love to make fun of the religious folks. But that much I understand. People who promote virtue have always been mocked by people of vice. I'll read one more. But what I just don't understand is the sheer blatant in-your-face hypocrisy. How can you complain at the top of your lungs that the entertainment industry is objectifying a woman's body, even as you lap this up as family entertainment? How can you be so blind as to see this lack of decency and modesty, this stripping away of human dignity, this exposing of raw sexuality is not just demeaning to women and men, it is directly linked to a pervasive, hedonistic, bacchanalian decadence that destroys the moral fabric of family and society and opens up a Pandora's box of issues that all of us realize. Double question mark. It was a great commentary. I edited nothing. Except I took out one quote, because that would have made it too obvious. Contacted the author, said, would you mind if I posted this? And then asked folks, who wrote this? Now, the answers were very, very interesting. We've got Rod Dreher. We had a bunch of Does He Live in Moscow? So Doug Wilson, Dougie Doug was Vody, Jeff Durbin, Robert Gagnon, Cy Ten Bruggencate, Summer Yeager. Even Summer got in there. Franklin Graham, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, John Cooper. There were two people. One was a cheater. There were two people who at least were moved out of the main spectrum. One lady, Roberta, she caught that word match and said, that's not an American. American would not call a football game a match. It's got to be someone who is from overseas. And she's right. Even though he's born in the U.S., but he spent a lot of time overseas and in countries where you'd have things like cricket. And crickets are matches. So those are big matches, stuff like that. And then, of course, Ijaz Ahmed knew who it was, but that wasn't fair. But he didn't reveal it. Sheikh Yasser Qadi. Dr. Qadi, with whom I did the dialogues 2 years ago, and the world fell apart, and there are still people that I haven't even spoken to since then who just think that I'm the world's worst person on the planet. Yes, a Muslim imam wrote those words. And so when I read them, I followed Dr. Qadi, and I read them, and I wrote to him and said, would you mind if I posted that? He had one quote from the Hadith in the original, just one 2-line quote. I took that out because that would have made it obvious. And I think there's a line of Arabic at the end, but I didn't include that either. But why in the world do that? It's real simple. This is a matter that we would, as Christians, put under the category of common grace, that we would recognize as a Romans 2 written upon the heart of man, general revelation reality. And what that means is people who cannot see what is going on in Western society, you have to put out a lot of effort to suppress the natural recognition that we have. That what was done there was demeaning to those women, demeaning to the dancers behind them, really demeaning to the men as well, the way that they were dressed and the way that they acted, demeaning to the children, demeaning to the people in the stadium, the football event, and all of Western culture as a whole. And if you can't see that, then there has been a tremendous investment of energy into dulling your moral senses. So much so that Dr. Qadi was right. 150 years ago, 100 years ago, you had to go to some seedy part of the town to watch somebody do stuff like that and had to pay to do it and then slink out and hope no one noticed who you were. This kind of common sense points to the reality that that general revelation works. It gets through. That we are created in the image of God. Muslims are created in the image of God just as we are created in the image of God. And Buddhists and Hindus and atheists, all made in the image of God. That's where the connection point is, image of God. But what also struck me was one of the things that I've never gotten over from 2 years ago. And when Dr. Qadi and I do more dialogues, and we're trying to do so, we're trying to set things up. Both of us spend way too much time in the cabin of an airplane. It makes it very difficult. Aside from just finding locations that will allow the two of us to talk, that's considered a bad thing to do. But one of the things that struck me so strongly from 2 years ago were the number of people who did not, who number of Christians. He didn't get much pushback from the Muslim side. But I'm the one that got the avalanche. And there were people who literally would say, we have absolutely nothing in common with Muslims. And I'm like, what? No, we have absolutely nothing in common with Muslims. Okay. You mean we're not all made in the image of God? Well, I mean, they worship a different God. Okay. I've made the case pretty plainly that even though the Muslim claim is that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God that we all worship, the serious Muslim is going to say, but if they understand the centrality of the doctrine of the Trinity, if they even understand the doctrine of the Trinity, that Trinitarian worship is shirk. And if Trinitarian worship is shirk, then we're not worshiping the same God. So we recognize that, but that doesn't change the fact that, for example, we have to deal with the reality that the Quran mentions the Torah and the Injil, the law and the gospel. There is some kind of necessary relationship, according to Surah 5, Surah Al-Ma'idah, between the Al-Kitab, the people of the book, the Al-Injil, the people of the gospel, and the transmission and preservation of Allah's message, with the final message being given to Muhammad in the Quran. That's a part of the Quranic revelation. So you have to deal with it on that level. You have to recognize that that's the claim. So we both claim to be monotheists. And if you don't accept that as a reality, then you can never have a discussion in any meaningful fashion. And most of the people who are pushing back don't want to have a discussion in a meaningful fashion. That's the problem. You can never have a meaningful discussion with a Muslim as to what the real nature of our differences are. And that means you're assuming they have an accurate knowledge of what it is we believe. They don't. Almost none of them do. I've posted videos correcting Dr. Cotty. He doesn't claim to be an expert in Christianity, so he wouldn't have any problem with that. But the point is, if you cannot say, here are areas of agreement, and therefore, in light of those, say, so this is what our real disagreements are. If you simply say, we disagree about everything, then you can't have a meaningful conversation. We do not disagree that God has spoken. We believe in divine revelation. We do not believe, we do not disagree that God has a specific law and intent and purpose for how mankind is to behave. But for me, one of the most important things that I think we can be discussing with our Muslim friends right now is why it is that we respond differently to the current cultural revolution that we are both facing at the same time in the same place. So here's an awesome opportunity for meaningful discussion, opportunity to get to the gospel, explain the gospel, the lordship of Christ, and do so in light of real differences. But if you won't admit the similarities, you can't ever get to the differences. Not in any meaningful fashion. And so when I saw this, I'm sitting here going, okay, there's a lot in the Quran that demonstrates the impact that, for example, the law of Moses had, the impact of having a creator, a single creator, not multiple creators, not polytheism, et cetera, et cetera. And so that provides a foundation upon which we can then say, okay, now upon which we can do what I did when I debated in the mosque in South Africa with Shabir Ali to talk about how can we know the one true God in light of our own sin. and there had the opportunity of talking about the need for the imputed righteousness of Jesus Christ. And right there with Muslims sitting not 10 feet away from me on the floor. I'm standing in front of the Qibla where the Imam leads the prayers. And I'm talking about the necessity of the imputed righteousness of Christ, because I can look him right in the eye and say, you know your heart, I know my heart. And if God is truly holy, then nothing I could ever do could ever live up to his standard. I need a perfect righteousness. And that righteousness is found in Jesus Christ. So there's the issue. And so Dr. Kadi can see exactly what we see. Recognizing that, how can we then move from there to a discussion of where we differ as to what our solutions would have to be? Because between Islam and Christianity, there is a fundamental anthropological difference. Fundamental anthropological difference. That is, we have very different doctrines of man and a very different doctrine of sin. But there's a starting point. There's someone made in the image of God that can recognize the obvious reality that Shakira and J-Lo were not honoring themselves. They were not honoring their bodies. They were not honoring their creator. They were cheapening themselves and everyone who was watching to do what they did. That's not empowering. I can't believe the number of people. You can tell when someone has decided to go hard left out of evangelicalism when right now they're talking about how empowering that kind of stuff is. And you know who you are. You're out there. But anyway, point is, there's a place where we can now go, we agree. So let's talk about application and where we go from here. Why is it that where do we end up diverging on this issue, and why? And that's going to take you where? Straight to the gospel. Straight to the gospel.